Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we'll bring you a special conversation between former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexey Arestovich, and Arty, a volunteer officer of Ukrainian military turned blogger who was participating in this war since about 2015. They discuss current problems with the military and discuss what can be optimized in the situation in Ukraine. How can this war be fought better? Special thanks go to our members. Today it is Darren Matthews, Topia SR, and Klaus Preditas. You guys are fantastic. Thank you for your continuous support. Of course, Bill, your super thanks keep rocking. And a special note goes to Larisa Nepachatova and the website Fuselage Creations. We're putting a link under the video. It's a unique resource if you're looking for a unique gift. They create keychains out of the skin of real airplanes. Sometimes it's historic airplane that was retired, but recently, more often, they got more keychains from the downed Russian invading aircraft. So those make pretty fantastic gifts. Original stream lasted over an hour and 40 minutes, so we will be splitting it in 2 parts. With this, let's go to a debate and see if the guys can find an interesting solution. And here is part number 1. Enjoy. So where we have good leaders, where we have good correlation and relations between military and civil administration, that's where we get tractors, bulldozers, and additional fortifications are being built. Where there is no good connection or no good leaders, then basically that effort becomes much less organized, and soldiers essentially and support service dig from here till dinner. So Arty, we invited him to our stream as a person who is now spending most of your time at the front line. What do you think about the strategy? What do you think about the situation happening there? Does the Ukrainian military feel the change of strategy? Yes, Ukrainian military indeed has to switch to defense mode, either due to a lack of proper offensive potential. Apologies, guys. Is he saying anything? Arty, please hold. Guys, Alexei cannot hear Arty's voice. Can you change the stream a little? Hang on just a second. Got technical issues. All right, let's try continuing, guys. Apologies for the technical issues. So, Ukrainian military had to switch in defense mode because since the troops are not advancing, their other condition on the battlefield is defense. And whether it's strategic or not, that's the second question. But this is the only other condition of troops if they're not in offensive. I do not see anything strategic from my position. I do not see what's happening in the back, whether we are building second and third lines of defense. Where I'm riding, I do not see them. Brigades and battalions are solving their problems on their own, even if to compare it with 2014, when our battalion was figuring out ways to organize our defense, we had more material resources back then to organize it. We were getting wood different ways, because besides equipment, it's also all kind of wood materials, and it would be nice to have also concrete and rebar products, but so far I'm not seeing them. Also, second, when we were getting ready for an offensive, the officers and everybody who are part of our troops, besides those who are allowed an access to high-level intel, they did not know the resources that the enemy has. With some gypsy mail, we figured out what is happening on our side. We had some of our commanding officers participating in that effort, so we at least generally were aware of what was happening on our Ukrainian side. Except for the arms that being supplied by the allies, those were also guesstimates at best. But we had zero information about Russian troops, besides what we could see on TV and media. Budanov was often coming out with statements that everything is bad on the Russian side and will probably still catch season in Crimea. But at the end of it, it turned out that it didn't work. Many of us did suspect that this would be a very reasonable outcome, because having almost 0% knowledge about Russian resources and our resources to compare, it would be difficult to model and plan how it will unfold. So now it's practically finishing. We're going into winter, and we definitely underestimated Russian resources that were against us on the front. And now all that information slowly becomes more and more available, how Putin was preparing for our counteroffensive. And we can also tell that our allies put us in a weak position by not supplying what was planned. And with the proportion of forces and equipment that we had by the beginning of counteroffensive, our chances were pretty nil. And if you touch upon the article of Washington Post, where the American analysts were trying to pin all the problems on the Ukrainian military leadership, I can say that thank you, and it's great that we did not concentrate all of our efforts, and it's my opinion from how I see the situation, but it's great that we did not concentrate all our efforts on one part in the south, and we did not make that breakthrough effort, because with the amount of resources stored by Russia versus our resources, if we indeed have broken through the Russian defense line in the south and would have brought a lot of our troops to the operative maneuver area behind the front lines of the enemy, I suspect at the end of this effort it would have a very bitter conclusion for us. And I would support Zaluzhny in general outline and how this whole campaign was waged of this summer. But obviously that we did not reach very good and adequate locations for defense all along the front lines, so we'll have to adjust. And given the proportion of enemy forces and given the terrain that we occupy now, we will have to leave certain positions that we've been holding for quite a while, some of them from Kharkov offensive, counteroffensive. And in my opinion, if we do not have enough means and forces to defend certain locales, we will have to leave those positions, especially if they're not too advantageous. And we might even need to leave the left side of Oskol and Black Stallion to minimize our losses. Now, in regards to development of technologies on this war, in these 2 years, there were several evolutions of new munitions, new methods of waging this war and organizing tactical actions. And I'm also talking about the different software solutions that were implemented for various hardware. And it actually changed several generations of engineering thought and military thought. So right now, the war is very different from what it was at the beginning. And looking at arms, FPV drones are also a significant tool that is changing the way we fight this war. And they continue to being developed. So at first it was our initiative, and now Russians are catching up on this. In some things, they were also ahead of us. We did not have Landsets, we did not have Orlans as a class. We did not have operative tactical level drones. Maybe artillery brigades had a couple, and that's about it. But we've lost them in the first weeks, maybe months of this war, and we didn't have anything to fulfill them with. But we work better with ideas. We bring new ideas to the front, we do it faster. They come stronger and with more money once they see the effect. But we usually are the ones starting new ideas. And we have enough people in the front who invest their creative abilities and intellectual capacities and engineering skills into these solutions. Russians are not as good in these, but they have a better financing. And here it's an ongoing battle. We build something new, they build something new, they follow in our steps, they see what is effective, they try to duplicate that, and they pour impressive amount of government money into this. And in the meanwhile, we're mostly fighting the battle with donations and private money, which is rather concerning. But still, I'm rather optimistic. I've watched one of the interviews by Alexei, and he was rather pessimistic in his estimate about the front collapsing and the future perspectives, and everything might be very bad unless something extraordinary happens. But I think I'm a bit more conservative. I have more conservative vision of this, so I don't think there'll be any fast collapse of Ukrainian front, and I can explain why do I think so. But overall, the trend indeed is bad. So if the same dynamics will continue on the enemy side and on our side, we definitely will be defending. We'll be defending further and further to the west. For a while, the front will probably keep stable. Perhaps we might even keep the current outline, but if we'll be lagging behind in innovations, if we'll be falling behind times. Last year, for example, we were several times less in artillery shells than Russians, but we did not collapse the front. And Russians only captured whatever they captured in the first effort of this war, in the first couple of weeks. And for over a year, our parity of artillery shells was about 1 to 10. So it's not always the single most pin of success. Innovation sometimes has a much larger influence on the war than quantitative characteristics. Although, of course, the times the enemy has advantage over you, that matters, because if, for example, you absolutely don't have artillery shells, then you can't fight with anything, and then the war definitely will change its flow. One needs to remember that oppositional warfare is not the only and single method of fighting against the enemy. I can refresh the memory of our viewers that at the beginning of the war, when the enemy was invading our country in huge columns, and they formally had advantage and generally were taking over certain regions, they had to withdraw eventually. So we still have this another ability to fight, to create a definite problem for the enemy to even be on our territory when we don't do positional warfare, but will be, for example, attacking their logistics and their operation centers. And of course, it will be covering larger swaths of land, but this is still doable. And I would say that even if the solid front line collapses, we have a definite opportunity to continue with maneuver warfare. Although switching to such a mode would be a serious defeat for us on the large scale, because the enemy will be operating on huge territories where we actually have civilians, and a big part of our economy will be taken out of the process. There'll be a lot of refugees coming from there, and there likely will be military crimes and other negative developments that we would like to preclude from happening. So I've been with this front for about 20 months, maybe 18 months already, in the area of the cities near the front line on the east. So I often visit Konstantinovka, Toretsk, Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Drushkovka. And I can say that population here is unilaterally not pro-Russian. And they're looking at us with a lot of hope that we will not let the enemy in. So for them, if we switch to such a mobile phase where we need to leave the front line and start working on the active defense, and we'll have to leave big parts of our land and perhaps allow enemy access to our villages and cities, that'll be a catastrophe for them. So, of course, that would not be something we would willingly consider. And if that eventually happens, that would be definitely an indicator of the failure of military political leadership of Ukraine, or their bankruptcy, if you want to put it this way. But I think right now we have rather good chances of keeping positional warfare, perhaps lose smaller parts of our territory after the enemy turns them into rubble. That's what they're doing now with Avdiivka. And the resources that I see right now, those 5 billion that Americans are sending, how much shells they're making and sending, how much ammo is being supplied to us from Europe and from states, and some general dynamics on the other positions, gives me, if not full confidence, then perhaps enough reason to believe that most likely the enemy will not be successful in getting significant achievements, at least in the window of the next 6 months. And even if they mobilize additional 300,000 or maybe 500,000 people, or maybe even 1 million, until the middle of next year, I don't believe there'll be anything significant changing on the front. All right, Alexei, do you agree generally with such an estimate? What's your opinion? Yeah, I would generally concur with Arty, but I would probably outline a couple more elements for furthering of this discussion. So I suspect that Zaluzhny knew from the beginning that we would not be able to be very successful in our counteroffensive just looking at the proportion of our resources versus enemies. But since the pressure on the political front and on the allies front was very big, he had to do something. So he was figuring a way to conduct this operation. And that commentary from the West that he disappeared and wasn't answering certain questions and pushes from the West, so that probably is an indicator that he realized that that pressure wasn't going to lead him to a positive conclusion, so he changed the tasks for the counteroffensive, and instead of occupying and cleaning the territory, he shifted the main weight to grading down the enemy army, to making sure we defeat as many and destroy as many of their resources as we can. And that outlines that he's a very strong-willed leader who can conduct his own strategy even under pressure. I'm also of an opinion that there won't be a big collapse of the front, because if you look at the dynamics of the Russian effort, in order to take a regional center like Avdiivka, Bakhmut, Solidar, it took them several months and a lot of effort to take one of these centers. And the wars are not being waged like this. They're not being won like that. In order to win the war of that scale, one needs to have a very good skill of conducting joint military operations at hundreds of miles large parts of the front, and I have serious concerns that Russia will even graduate to that level even by the end of this war. Comrade Stalin, whom they're trying to cosplay, was actually conducting 3 to 4 strategic offensives a year. So this is very incomparable to what the Russian army under Putin is doing now. They have about 400,000 troops in our territory now, and they are able to conduct maybe a tactical or at most operative tactical efforts near Bakhmut and near Avdiivka. So it's a brigade level of defense and offense. And they're wasting a crazy amount of resources. They have to concentrate the forces of 3 armies near Avdiivka. And they're doing it very slow and in a very inexperienced mode. So you cannot really crush the front line in this tempo, but as Zaluzhny indicated in his article in The Economist around the 1st of November, giving the estimation of that situation and following Arty's description, what it all tells us is that such an positional warfare is not in favor of Ukraine, because positional warfare disavows us from an opportunity to put an emphasis on skill, on interesting operating actions. It puts an emphasis on the fight of potentials, and our potential is not on par with Russian. We are much stronger in operations, in special operations, in unusual solutions. So a good example would be Kharkov operation, even though it was unusual and not planned. But our landing on the other bank near Kherson, that's a good example. Historically, that would be Manstein's move through Ardennes. That would be a good example when they undercut the group on the French front. So Zaluzhny is indicating towards a positional warfare and saying that it's difficult to work otherwise because we have eyes in the sky, they have eyes too, each side sees everything that the other side is doing, and he tosses the ball to politicians. In the meantime, what does our political leadership do? They denounce that problem. Arty is also saying that the current front line is not exactly effective to hold because we have reached certain areas, but we have not, in some parts of the front, reached a very convenient areas for defense. So we will have to withdraw a bit to make sure we are in a good position to defend. And here I have a question, because war is a political affair, and I'm not sure if political leadership can and has the capacity to listen to our military, to allow them to leave liberated areas in order to let the army stand on more advantageous positions. Or would they do what we often saw during this war? Stay there, not a step back, it's our territory, we do not give it to the enemy. There are good examples too, but there are more negative examples of that kind. And it has been even before, since 2014. You can look at Debaltseve, at Donetsk airport, and Avdiivka, Popasna, Lysychansk, Severodonetsk before that. There is always a good attempt to defend an area, to crush enough enemy's advancing force there, but there always comes a time when it's good time to withdraw. And we several times on the same scheme have missed this moment, just starting since 24th of February. So this is definitely a negative factor that concerns me in regards to positional warfare. So we'll see how it works in Avdiivka. If Russian military will have enough potential to finish pressing the Avdiivka, I'm waiting for this moment to see when and if our political leadership will actually give an order to withdraw, and will they give it timely. Because if that happens in a good way, then it means that our military officers found a way to impress that on the political leadership. It's a Kutuzov's dilemma. You lose an army, you lose a country. You lose a country, but you keep an army, you can take the country back. And this is a typical scale, but it's a hard one to make a decision on, so I'm observing. And the third is what we talked about with the Tsuk, is the war of technology and potentials. If we are making 50 FPV drones, out of which 20 are ours and 30 would be just made of Chinese components, and Russia would be making 300. And they already made a bunch of economic decisions to heighten their potential for producing these pieces of equipment. And it's from government, military, industrial complex, to just orders to their oligarchs, to their companies and private enterprise. So they're using all different channels to get as many drones as they can. So this is a war of potentials and the war of the possible increase in production, and also the war in radio electronic warfare systems, which they are rather successful in. So they actually now have tools that allow them to fight some of the NATO tools, to disorient some of the NATO missiles and some of the things that we were given. So they're evolving some of their equipment, like Landsats and such. So this is additional negative and stressful factor for positional warfare. Their infantry and ground command is not really successful. Their cadre army died here in the first half a year of this war, and the current army, to our luck, doesn't have enough time to train. Their lower level officers and commanders, they usually get wasted the attrition rate is pretty high. So they don't have enough time to give the information to train their new recruits how to fight. So that is their weakness. But if the vector of potential capabilities will continue increasing, then with all these FPVs, drones, gliding air bombs, which they used up over 1,000 last month. So then in that positional warfare, and with our lack of fortifications, while they have Surovikin lines and everything, and on our side we just have a soldier with a shovel digging, this is the sum of factors that might make even positional warfare rather problematic for us in a horizon of about 6 months. So if they'll be preparing as an offensive for the next summer, then we're looking at late spring, early summer for the operation, and they might get some positive outcome of their efforts. Then that's what we're talking about, getting the straight line towards the Black Stallion River, maybe take 2, 3 at most of regional centers at max that they can hope for. But this would be enough to show the politicians in Ukraine and to people in the West the lack of perspective of such a warfare, protracted warfare in Ukraine. And Russia, with this, will be preparing a strong negotiation position to talk with the United States, not even with us, but this is their strategic idea, I think. This is what they're looking for right now. They want to get the best strategic positions on the front by the hot phase of American elections. So they want to impress not a military success, but ideological or political success in this war. And of course, to get more sympathies of the global South on their side, like Iran, perhaps China, and to continue manipulating the war of a global South versus the West, which, by the way, the West never really came to this war, and to try to affect the outcome of this war. So what we can do, I think, first of all, is our military-industrial complex. We need to reinforce the effort there. And of course, the fortification lines. We need to make sure we have good fortifications that hold the lines, that provide cover for big parts of the front, and that automatically will decrease our losses and they'll double the losses of the enemy. Because if you create such a fortification, if you provide enough cover fire, if you put landmines, their attempts will slow down incredibly. And just by having these fortifications, we have a good chance of breaking their strategic ideas. And the other part is we need to get more support. By hook or by crook, we need to find a way to get more support from the West, because we are creative. We know how to use technology in an orthodox way. And one of the candidates for supplies would be South Korea, and then the other would be United States, and probably avoiding Congress, so we would not be stopped, that or the aid would not be vetted. So President has ways from United States to send more ammo and more equipment directly, and I know they're working on that here, so we'll see how it unfolds. And even if we just do that, and I'll pick the most conservative variant, not what we talked with the Tsuk about, even if we are not too friendly with our immediate neighbors and we don't have much support besides of the arms from states in Korea, that actually will provide us enough to hold at least until the middle of next year and to stall Russia in their effort to take more territories. All right, thank you, Alexei. Arty, what is your opinion now? Do you agree with Alexei? Do you not agree? How do you see the logic of events? What should be happening in Ukraine? What are the priorities? I think Arestovich outlined them rather well, but perhaps you see some more priorities that Ukraine needs to follow, since you're closer to the front line. From what you said at the opening statement, it looks like there could be some columns, 2 years from the beginning of this war, walking in Ukraine. Do you think there's a way to preclude that? Yeah, let me step in here too. I forgot to mention that Arty indeed already brought in that scenario of a catastrophic warfare when we lost the positional warfare and we have to go to semi-partisan and mobile defense efforts. And from the military standpoint, of course, you can do that. This is the same way we've done it at the beginning. But on the political side, this is a huge problem. Arty indicated that we'll lose the industrial capacity and it will affect our economy. It also has a political aspect. It would mean a huge political crisis in Ukraine and a foreign political crisis as well. Because in the general war between the global South and the global West, it would mean almost an Afghanistan-style defeat for Biden and his administration. And it would be very difficult to measure the exact consequences of this. Here, Russia would acquire huge advantage compared to China and Iran to press onto the West. And it's usually in a partisan warfare when you run out of ammo. Because if you're too mobile and you do not have clear supply lines, it's very difficult to provide for your troops. But I do hope that we can avoid talking about that scenario, and I think we have enough resources to support strategic situation on the front right now as it is. Arty, what do you think? There is a bit of echo, if you guys can work on that while I'm answering. But indeed, I would agree with Alexei, however, just to outline that this is the next step of defending our territory. If we cannot hold the front, we'll continue fighting mobile warfare. That may actually be additional reason for Russian troops to not push too hard because they don't want to find themselves in such a warfare. And I do want to bring attention to a few deficiencies. First of all, we do not have adequate territorial defense troops. Those that were initially created in Kharkov and in Dnieper, they do not have a technical capability to come and defend their city if the need arises. It feels like the results of 2022, they calmed down our political military leadership and they just gave up on training territorial defense efforts, the ones that initially they had at the first year of this war. Now they're trying to gather the arms back, the ones that they gave out to the territorial defenders, instead of working on the organization, instead of training them better. So territorial defense troops are now turning into a formal structure rather than a live structure. Some of them are actively participating in military actions, so they're basically joining the current Ukrainian military. And in the meanwhile, the structure of territorial defense is a pretty bureaucratic story. And of course, there are interesting figures leading it. There's a lot of corruption there, which is absolutely inadequate for the needs of the current moment and the possible development of events. If the enemy knew that every city with 1 million population would be able to bring out at least 200,000 troops to defend itself, perhaps not with tanks and howitzers, but with javelins, with stingers, with machine guns, and other means that would allow to fight for their city, then these ideas would visit the enemy's mind much less frequently to occupy these territories. So, and in addition, even if somewhere on up above will sign an agreement that will give up certain positions to the enemy, like it happened with Debaltseve back in the early days of this several-year war, this would not be a fact because people of the city would not want to, if they don't want to give the city, they will not. And I would agree here with Alexei that unless we change on the top political and military level, we are going to be looking at a long and sad story. Because on one hand, a big part of our society is not ready to give up. We're fighting. We are fighting for the country. The spirit is still here. And the enemy doesn't have enough potential to break us, really. I'm just looking at what I see. I don't have the overall picture, but from what I'm seeing on the front. In the meanwhile, our enemy, for the most part, are recruiting their army, so they're not subjecting their territories and their population to that pressure of mass mobilization. So they're just offering people to make money, and those who want to make extra money, they go. And our task is to make sure that it would be more scary for them to earn this money. So we want to liquidate as many of these fighters for money as we can. And of course, using measures of information warfare to deliver the information and the risks to potential conscripts and participants of this war on the Russian side. So let's say that the human resource of that type that is eager to go and fight like that is definitely depletable in Russia. It's not millions, it's maybe several hundred thousands overall. And I think, yeah, several hundred thousand is maybe 500,000 in a year. That's their borderline capacity. Plus, we do have huge regions where we can optimize. That, first of all, is talking about the quality of management of our troops, the quality of command, of course, the arms that we use. With our allies, we're asking them what we really need, but people usually notice that we need millions of shells, right? We are and should be asking more for precision munitions. I'm looking at the front, right? Of course, you can have millions of shells to achieve your goals. But here's an example. There is a mortar that's attacking our infantry, and our infantry really doesn't like that high-caliber mortar on that front. And they ask our artillery to take it out. And we're trying to take it out, but the Russians are doing the basic minimum to protect themselves. So they're fortified position a bit, they're folding it down when they're not shooting. They come out, they shoot a little, then they fold it or take it out back down in the trench. And we keep shooting at that position, but we don't have Excaliburs, we don't have anything precision-wise, and the weather may be bad, so FPV, for whatever other reason, cannot reach that mortar. And then we continue spending our shells in a kind of dumb way. If you saw pictures from the fields, the aerial photos, you can see a lot of craters from artillery shells in the fields, and you can see that a large number of them exploded in the fields where there was nobody, when basically artillery was trying to reach and destroy the grove and the enemy forces hiding there. But you can see that they've missed quite a few, and they're wasting at least a half without hitting targets. So there are two aspects here. First of all, the arms, these arms we're talking about, they're not high precision. And if we're talking about artillery, this is my first specialty in the military. And I want to say that the quality of Ukrainian artillery, and I heard many times from Alexei, especially at the beginning of this war, when he was mostly taking care of the psychological health of our citizens at the beginning of this war. The evaluation of our artillery quality was way higher than it actually is on the real front line. At the beginning of this war, I worked with different batteries, with different divisions, and I want to say that, of course, there are ones that are fantastic in reaching their goals and targets, but majority are rather mediocre. In line of 2 years of war with experience, it did grow a bit, but not too much, because our system of how we recruit, how we pick the cadre didn't change much. Because even if to compare it with the Soviet times, when a poorly shooting officer who badly shoots at the training grounds, and in the Soviet times, that officer would never have a chance to become a commander of a battery. So in those times, if he wanted to become a major, he would need to look for a different position that is not related to shooting anything. And Ukrainian military, unfortunately, the criteria is different. Just in front of my eyes, one of the brigade commanders who basically destroyed brigade from the state of one of the best in our assets to a situation when it came to the front to cover our infantry. Our infantry was running for the hills because they knew that this brigade cannot shoot accurately anymore. And he basically was commanding this brigade for half a year, and now he got a promotion. And according to what I hear now, he'll be now supposedly bettering our recruitment efforts for territorial defense. So rather huge position. And my condolences to that area of our defense where they sent him. But that just to highlight the problem with selection. When you guys were talking with Datsuk, I tuned in a bit later and I heard a few arguments. I think Alexei was bringing a comparison with French Revolution, which started in 92 and ended in about 13, so lasted for about 20 years. It had several phases. I heard the word convent you used there. And here in Ukraine, we have a significant difference from French Revolutionary Army. If you draw an analogy again with France, as if revolutionary people, masses of France, in the face of foreign invasion, they figured that since we don't have trained officers, let's take the officers of Ludwig XVI, right? And we'll be fighting under these officers, revolutionary people of France, conducting liberation warfare against foreign invaders under the command of the same barons and dukes from at least a very non-revolutionary crowd, right, or layer of society. And that's what's happening here. Our Bernadottes, Massens, and Napoleons, they're at best at a level of sergeants or lieutenants. But the cast of the higher level officers that was formed before 2014, that's the one, these are the ones who are generals today. And that's where I would start today. I would actually start with them and with a simple IQ test. And all generals who score less than 150, I would fire at a spot or transfer to positions that match their potential, their intellectual capacity. And I'm afraid that we have generals who won't even reach 100. Or as the current joke in the military goes, they're not much bigger than the size of their head. And when I learned about who is commanding the main offensive on the south, my hair rose on my head. I think Alexei knows who I'm talking about. And I know that personage from 2014. And for me, it's a big riddle. How did he get to such a responsible part of the front? And before that, he was at the other, not less responsible part of defense of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. So how? And Zaluzhny knows him real well. What makes Zaluzhny different from the rest of the mass of that patrician society of generals is that his goal is understandable for us and is the one that we share: to win in this war, to cause the maximum damage to our enemy. And for that, he is ready to go for non-standard decisions, and he's eager to argue with his superiors. Definitely not a fight. That's additional dynamic and actually political side that's presenting it as a fight. No, he's ready to argue and he's ready to press his ideas. And this is one of the technical moves that he developed in this society, when they find ways to impress what they want to, and then sometimes they, find ways to not get a command they don't want to get, to not answer the question that they don't want to answer, to not get that question. And many people are using these methods, but those who are really fighting for results and not about their career, that's what people support. When these tricks and these trickery methods are used against the political leadership to be able to fight this war successfully. And this is what Zaluzhny is like. He's using his political skills to actually push through the ideas that he knows would help us win. But knowing Zaluzhny, right, I didn't have a direct input, but in knowing him a bit, I would say that, yeah, he's definitely a different character from the others. And to sum it up, I would say unless we really start growing our own Napoleons and Bernadottes and we'll leave these dukes in charge, of course, you'll never get a command to leave a position that you need to leave timely. The decision might as well be taken, but much later when it's too late. And we've wasted too many people trying to defend a useless position. So we left Debaltseva back in the day. We were successful because there was Shaptala who took responsibility on his shoulders. If he personally wouldn't have done it, then each of us would be saving ourselves. For example, our battalion had our own plan B, how to leave the area if we get surrounded. If the commander of 128th Brigade would not take responsibility and to lead us to breakthrough. So there's definitely something to work on. And if you work real well in this direction, if you really allow your successful commanders to grow, then that would definitely lead us to be more effective on the front. We'll be losing less people, and the enemy's losses will increase. And I think that efficacy that will be expressed in the numbers of losses, we can actually amp this KPI much higher if we will be serious about promoting the right officers. And today it's in the hands of commander-in-chief and superior commander-in-chief, but we understand it's a political evolution, right? Even Napoleon wasn't a Napoleon from the beginning. But at the end of the story, French army became what it became. We are still fighting with the officers of Louis XVI. And Zaluzhny is just one of them, the better of them, because he doesn't have his court interests trampling the interests of this war. They're secondary to winning this war, and that's why he's better. And I can see that his objective is not losing extra people, but I see him also going for some compromise, right? He started this counteroffensive still. And I have still a question. How did we end up having this general leading this front in the south? So if I get a chance, I'll ask him. Look, I think one of the most important things that you both talked about, you and Alexei, and we talked about that on the stream with Datsuk, you're delivering that same key thought, that it's time to acknowledge that the fight for the borders of 1991 is unrealistic on this stage. And the key element would be to make sure that we preserve the state in the way when the next year, when Russia will likely conduct another large-scale offensive, we will have to withdraw, probably, but we'll need to make it successfully, because if we do it right, it will grind their forces again, and their offensive will not matter much, and we'll probably be able to counter it. But in order to do that, we need to drastically increase our management and personnel capacities and the use of our specialists and human resources to conduct this warfare. This is how I would resume what you were talking about. Do you agree? Yes, I would. I would agree with that. We have inner reserve that we can use even without any extra aid from the outside. And we definitely have these reserves in commanding the troops. But I do not see political will. The same Zaluzhny, he made some single, basically using pincers to take a good commander who is not an academician yet, but pulling him from somewhere and putting him in a position where there should be a graduate from the operative tactical faculty. And this officer would not be put in a strategic level yet. But I would definitely replace a bunch of those people on the operative level and on the strategic level. They're absolutely professionally inadequate, except for very few.